what do you think about gifting sex to your partner?
That's a complicated one. I think that the term gifting sex can encompass such a wide range of behaviors so that it is neither good nor bad. It depends on what it means to the individual. And the range I've seen is everything from I feel that my partner wants it, I'm open to it, I'm not really excited about it, but I'm open to it, I know it'll make us feel closer, I'll probably feel good by the end, I'll get into it, which is actually just speaking to that idea of responsive desire.
Yeah, which is normal.
Which is completely normal, to people who have told me that they feel that they need to, on special occasions or as a reward, even when they're not feeling like it, offer themselves up, and then they're completely not into it. It just is something that they're basically offering their body, but their mind is checked out. And that is a recipe for disaster. I won't say that's bad. There's no judgment. It's a recipe for long-term disaster in my book, because you're not feeling fulfilled. It leads to a distinct possibility of resentment. You are not being present during that activity, and the resentment can happen because you feel obligated. So between the sense of obligation and the lack of pleasure, there is a large room for resentment, and resentment is not a great way to conduct satisfying sexual interactions.
Yeah.
Or a really good basis for healthy relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think that occasionally gifting sex is fine. Like, it's totally fine. It's just a part of, like, you do things for your partner sometimes that you don't want to do, like pick up their underwear off the floor, whatever it is, right? Like, or do their laundry or whatever. And it's okay. Sometimes you don't want to, but not all the time.
Right.
At least that's my thought. And I think in terms of, I've had some friends who've told me, like, my partner expects sex every single day from me because we are married and we have to be together. And that's sort of what the expectation is. And I think that's sort of challenging to navigate, because if you don't have desire every single day, like say you do most of the time, that's great. But if you're doing it out of obligation day after day after day, it can sort of get you set up for problems in the long term.
And this is where that communication is so important, because all of this is speaking to that idea of gifting sex and sometimes it's okay. Yes, it is. I think another key myth that we need to bust about sexuality, beyond the idea of desire being only spontaneous desire, is that sex in all its forms, using the term sex to mean all sexual engagement, is something that you should only engage in when you really want it. And I can hear the backlash to this statement already. I can hear it already. But what I mean is that to a degree, we don't, as adults, engage in there's a wide variety of behaviors that we don't engage in just because we want to.
Right.
We engage in them also because we understand that they will benefit us in a myriad of ways. And sexuality and sexual engagement is no different. The idea that it's just because you're horny or you just want it is a stumbling block. You can both want it for a variety of reasons: to please your partner, to sleep better, to get warm on a cold night. You can also maybe not be so excited about the sexual engagement or be expecting to have as much pleasure yourself, but value that your partner will feel pleasured and value how it supports the relationship. And so what are your values? What are your goals around this activity?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to pay their bills. We pay bills. Nor am I saying sex should be just an obligation of going to pay the bills, but there needs to be communication, both internally with yourself and with your partners, about where on that spectrum are you, and what are the expectations around that, so that you have some room for both engaging for a variety of reasons, or starting with room to engage when you want to, but also room to engage for a variety of reasons, and room to engage because the reasons are not sexual end goals in and of themselves.
Yeah. I think it was interesting you said like having sex to support the relationship or support your partner. And I wonder, as you're saying that, like when people are like, I don't want to have sex because I'm not in the mood or because whatever, I just don't want to. I wonder in terms of like, what is the hesitation? Like if you have sex to support the relationship or the partner or just part of like not obligation, but like feeling like just the things you described, why does that make you feel bad? Right? Like, are we told in media or in society that that's not something you should do?
I think I'm not sure the message is so much a direct negative message of you should not do that as much as there is you are missing a positive. That, of course, when you go to engage in sex, you should be aroused, you should be excited, you should have crashing simultaneous orgasms. And if you are not, you're doing it incorrectly. Mm-hmm. And the corollary to that idea of leaving room for engaging in a broad variety of reasons is also leaving a lot of room to understand when you really don't want to engage or what your limits are at that moment. But with both of those, honoring them so that it is okay, this is what I'm capable of now, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. That is enough. What is the fundamental guiding principle through this is, are you getting some pleasure out of this in some way? Is it serving you in some positive way? Whether that positive way is pleasing your partner and you feel good about it, feeling physically satisfied yourself, maybe both. If it is not serving you in any way, if it is a negative, if it is at least not a positive, and definitely if it is a negative or begins to become a negative, then we're working into a danger zone. But we don't leave room for the varieties of ways in which this might be self-serving and self-supportive and supportive of the relationship. And I use the term self-serving and self-supportive not in a negative manner, but in a protective manner of providing for yourself and all of your wants and needs. Mm-hmm. We don't leave room for sex to be something that can help in these other ways. Yeah. We have this myth, you have to do it for this amazing physical reaction kind of way.
Yeah, I always say that it's okay for sex to occasionally or very often be mediocre. As long as you are, pretty regularly having some form of excellent sex, like it's okay. Sometimes it's going to be mediocre.
There is a wonderful theory around this by my friends Peggy Kleinplatz and Barry McCarthy, who talk about good enough sex.
Yeah.
And that it is not that you have to be having amazing room crashing sex all the time. You have to be having good enough sex, that there has to be some pleasure, something you're getting out of it. And whether that pleasure is physical, emotional, relational, good sleep, it doesn't matter what the reason is, as long as it's good enough on a regular enough basis, hopefully with some great thrown in there along the way, and maybe with some once in a while too.
Right.
As long as the average is good enough, that is the kind of sex that can keep you going.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Also, I think the other thing couples struggle with is sexual boredom, right? Or getting into a routine. So what tips or, things that people can incorporate in terms of novelty or other things to sort of spice up their sex life?
This is a great one. So I think that there's two sides to this. One of which is going back to that idea of good enough sex. Good enough sex is good enough sex. And everybody will fall into, when they are in a relationship, will fall into what we call the sexual script. What is the basic way that you do it, the average way that you do it again and again? And that can be either a time of day of the week, or weeks of the month. What positions do you usually use? How do you usually approach it? And everybody will fall into some form of moderate routine with their sexual script, and it's a tried and true. And the idea that it has to be different every time is also one of those fallacies. Mm-hmm. And so a sexual script is a great thing to have. It's comforting. It's your go-to meal. It's what you reach for, and it keeps you nourished, and it keeps you sustained, and it keeps you going. So first, we want to understand that there's nothing wrong with that. But the flip side is, yes, sometimes you're kind of like, well, that's kind of boring. I'm done eating my go-to home meal. I'm ready to go out for a nice, fancy something different. Mm-hmm. And there are so many things that you can do to mix it up. And they range from simply changing the time of day to incorporating some differences of positions, to trying some new approaches. One of the things that I think is a great approach is reapproaching the way you touch your partner and really taking the time to just touch your partner. Maybe even taking a whole session or 2 sessions where you're not even focused on genital contact, but focused on pleasuring your partner in other ways and focused on what that feels like to you. This is sort of a variation of what we call sensate focus in sex therapy. And it's a wonderful way to reintroduce yourself to your partner and reintroduce yourself to the feelings that you have with them, and for them to reintroduce themselves to your feelings and how it works. But there's so many things you can do. There is dressing up. There are a variety of toys. You could go and do some role play either at home or meet out at a dinner and pretend to be on a date or try a new routine. And the only limit is your imagination. One of the most wonderful things about sexuality is if we allow ourselves, it is one of the few areas that we are free to play as adults. It is one of the few areas where whatever you want to do, whatever you want to try, however you want to imagine it, whatever make-believe, whatever new construct you want to come up with, it's all fair game as long as your partner is in agreement. And as long as, if you're doing some things that are more exotic, you understand some of the risks. But there's plenty of ways to find the information out there and start engaging and trying things.
So how do you introduce, let's say, a kink? Let's say, first, maybe you can define a kink, but also like, how do you introduce that to your partner? Because it may be something very novel that you want to try, but you don't know how to really talk about it.
I love this question because I think people do not understand what kinks are. And I think that they don't understand the difference between kinks and fetishes very much at all. It's often used interchangeably. So a fetish is, at its most elemental, when an individual has an object or a part of the body that they really need to be able to experience desire, arousal, sexual satisfaction. And so it's something that's needed. You need to incorporate that in some way. Kink is not that. Kink is a term that refers to wanting to engage in sexual activities that are outside the cultural norm. As such, there is no exact definition of kink outside of that because it is culturally and contextually dependent. What might be outside the sexual norm here and now is not what is outside the sexual norm in another culture or at another time. And it's shifting rapidly. It even here in the United States is very different between different age groups. So we know that younger people are looking a lot at online porn. And one of the things that we're seeing, and I think you're going to have somebody to talk about this in great detail, but that there's been a lot of a rise in the amount of choking behaviors that are being engaged in during sex. This is not considered normal by the older generations here in America. And it's considered very normal by those engaging in it. So by definition, for those engaging in it, it's not a kink. It is part of sexual activity, but yet for the older generations, it's a kink. And so kink really refers to just what is considered outside the sexual norm. So it is a very individual definition. It can
be anything, really. Yeah.
But if you have something that you want to bring in and try, then again, it can be quite awkward because we don't know how to talk about sex. But again, using some of those same principles of, there's something I want to talk to you about. I really love what we're doing, but there's something else I've been thinking about. Again, if you're not comfortable talking face to face, go on a walk, go for a drive. And then you can say, this is something that's kind of piqued my interest. I've been reading about it, or I've been thinking about it. If you're comfortable sharing your fantasies about it, a good way to bring it up might be, it's something that, I've thought about. Would you be interested in reading about it with me? Or if you feel braver, would you be interested in trying some of this with me? You can share, perhaps if you found it in erotica or in some porn that you've seen. I'd like to watch this with you because it's something that's been piquing my interest. If you're interested in sharing it, that's one step. If you're interested in engaging, that's another step. Not as in progressive either, just sometimes people want to share that looking at it or thinking about it or talking about it, but don't actually want to engage. And sometimes they want to actually engage and incorporate a new activity. So using some props and tools can be helpful. There are also a few, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, but there are a few online sex compatibility or sexual interest quizzes that you can find. And the gist of them is that they take you through and you list some of the things that you might be interested in trying and some of the things that you've been interested in doing. And your partner does the same. And then it puts it through the website and spits out, oh, these are the ones you're compatible with, and here are some ones to try on the sides, so that you can feel less vulnerable by putting it in and then having it on a piece of paper, because you're both doing it at the same time.
And someone else outputting the results for you.
Exactly. So that can be a great way of doing it. Another fun way of doing it is finding one of the sex games that has dice that have a variety of different things to try, and you can just kind of roll the dice, see what comes up, discuss it, try it, see how it goes. It's important to talk about what it is that you want to do. When you're trying something new, you can talk about what are the parameters, what are you hoping to get out of it. You can talk about how you would like to engage. Again, if it's going to be something that involves the potential for some bodily impact or potential harm, you do want to make sure you've done some research behind it to understand how to do it safely and to consent with your partner. Make sure you have safe words. There are great resources on the BDSM community websites that don't necessarily have to be for hardcore BDSM. It's just a wonderful codified way of going through negotiating how you're going to engage sexually. And it can be for any way that you're engaging. But using those parameters and then talking about it afterwards. How was it for you? What did you like about it? What did you get out of it? What was exciting and new? What was not as exciting as you thought it might be? What did you not like? Do you want to do it again? Do you want to incorporate it all the time? So checking in afterwards can be as important.